Right, so the basis of this episode, I think, is because we touched on social networking kind of as a tail end of the conversation about fanboyism. I thought like it might be worthwhile going into social networking in greater depth, like how and why people use it and what their purposes are and why some are successful and some aren't.
Can I start with the term social media? Because I hate the term social media, and it's only been me for the longest time. Like, whenever people say it, I kind of cringe, and I kind of like, okay, you're not at work now, you can just say Facebook, or you can just say Twitter, it's fine. Like even my mum says, it's just like, oh, well, I saw this on social media. You mean you were on Twitter and you saw that? Like, you can just say the name of the thing. Just because the BBC uses the term social media because they need to have like all of these political terms that they use. And they used to use the word social networking, but for some reason that's gone and now they're using social media. But I just hate hearing people say it. It's like, it's just filled with corporate sort of feelings. And I just hate it.
No, I don't disagree with your point. I just I haven't given it a huge amount of thought.
I prefer the term social networking because it's more all-encompassing, and it doesn't just include Facebook and Twitter, but it also includes, I think, all of the other things which are really relevant, like Snapchat and Instagram and all of messaging. Like, so if you use iMessage or WhatsApp or anything like that, and there's an awful lot of those services that are popular, and they all have different features. They're all social, but they all have different types of features and different types of interaction. So I think the term social networking is more relevant in that it actually encompasses a great deal of stuff, where social media, I just think, is like people saying, oh, this thing that happened on Twitter. But yeah, I don't mind it when people use social networking, because I kind of think it's just like all they're referring to is everything that happens on the internet.
I wouldn't regard iMessage and WhatsApp as social networking.
But it's social, and it's
But it's not. It's not really social. It's not really social. It's one-to-one. It's like saying a text message to someone.
Yeah.
It's incredibly personal. It's not. But and it's not really in the same category as something like using Facebook or Twitter, where you're publicly posting and publishing something to a large audience. That's not what you're doing with an instant messaging service.
Mm. And I was trying to explain how it was networking as well, just very briefly.
But if two terms have two different meanings, say something like a news source, like The Verge or the BBC or something equivalent, or like YouTube or something, where it's content to be consumed. That's where I think it's kind of relevant, because not everybody uses Facebook or Twitter to create content. Not all of them use them to post their thoughts. A lot of them use it just to consume other things. So some people use Twitter as like a news aggregator, so they'll just subscribe to a bunch of news feeds or celebrities or people they find interesting, and they'll just consume that, and they won't actually their tweet counts will be rather low. So they're not networking. They're just using it as a media source, so they can take in things that they find interesting that are published online. That's why, and Tumblr's the exact same, because a lot of people don't produce their own content on Tumblr. They just consume and share existing content. So I think that's maybe where social media becomes more relevant, because you're not using it's not like LinkedIn where you're using it to connect with people. You're using it to consume what other people are putting out there.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because networking is when you're building a network of friends.
Yeah, you're consciously making an effort to connect with
a group of people
or other things. Yeah, and that's not what a lot of people use it for.
So can we go through the different social networks? Because I've strong feelings towards some of them.
Right. So the ones that I will kind of want to talk, the main two I want to talk about are Facebook and Twitter, because it's semi-relevant at the moment, because the quarterly returns have just come out and it's the end of 2015's return, so people have been talking about how the different companies have performed over the year. And Twitter's been getting a lot of grief recently because they've fired a bunch of executives, or some executives have left. They are not growing and stuff. So I thought it would be quite interesting to see what is relevant and what your thoughts are on each platform.
Yeah, Twitter is dwindling in value. And honestly, I do think it could be helped by, if people really are saying social media and they mean Twitter, they just say the word Twitter. Like, this is why that occurred to me, because they are dwindling. If you look at their,
that's not their problem, though. People being aware of Twitter is not their problem.
Well, no, hang on. If you look at their, what's it called? The value graph thing. What's it called? The share value thing.
The stock price.
Yeah, if you look at their stock price, I can't believe I forgot that term. If you look at Twitter's stock price, it is going down and down and down, and it has been for months. It has been since Jack Dorsey got back there, and it hasn't really shown any positive curve. And
you're talking about Twitter stock value, because like by the amount of people who say Twitter on the internet, where it's more to do with like their stock values are more related to their growth. And their growth is flat. They're not bringing a huge amount more people in. Their user base isn't growing as fast as other networks. So if you look at the largest social networks are Facebook, then WhatsApp, which was bought by Facebook, then Facebook Messenger, which is owned by Facebook, and it was broken out of the Facebook application into its own one. And I now think they don't include messaging in the Facebook application anymore, but it's still on the web page. And then there's a couple of other conversational ones like WeChat and stuff, and then Tumblr, which is owned by Yahoo, then Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, and then Twitter. So it's really fallen down the lines. Like, it's got the same kind of user base as Skype does, and that's why its stock's diving, because it's not adding anything. It's not adding any useful features to people. It's not innovating and adding stuff that people want to use.
If we didn't care about like what Twitter stock price is, and to be honest,
I don't think people do care about Twitter stock prices.
Yeah, and it's the same with Apple. Like, I don't care that much. Like, I'm aware of it. People talk about it, but I don't like personally like, oh no, it's down, or oh yeah, it's up. This is a great thing. I more care about what the company does and what I get out of the company and their products, and how they're influencing the world and stuff like that. Twitter, I think, is like one of my favorite services still. Like, because I'm set up with Twitter and I have a great community of people that I follow, we talk about it like I said it's in trouble, but it is one of my favorite websites. And unless they make some big mistakes, I couldn't see that I would still be using Twitter as much as I'm using it now in 3 years' time. If we talk about how Twitter should change, I really don't know like I really don't know what I would want them to change right now. Do you have any ideas on that?
So, how I wanted to do this was I was just going to ask you a series of questions, and then we could just talk about stuff based on the series of questions. Because there's a bunch of issues with Twitter that they have with harassment and stuff like that that I wanted to talk about. We're going to basically just talk about Twitter for the next half an hour.
Cool. You should have sent me this. I'm just reading through your notes. You should have sent me this beforehand, because like seeing this, I'm like, oh, that's why I wanted to go with it. But I could not have known that.
What's your typical criteria when it comes to following somebody? If you land upon a profile or someone is retweeted onto your timeline, what are your criteria that'll make you choose to follow them?
Well, the people that I follow kind of fall into a number of different categories, so they have to fall into one of those things. So, for example, if they are into iOS development or they're an iOS designer, then I'm probably going to find the things that they're saying quite interesting. So at that point, then I go and look at their tweets and I see what they're generally talking about. Like, if they're talking about stuff that I really don't care about, if they talk about reality TV or if they talk about like celebrities and stuff like that, it's just like not something that interests me. Or if they talk about like cars and stuff like that or sports, all of that sort of stuff kind of rules them out generally, because you just don't want that on your timeline. Anything that's kind of just a little bit witty or jokey, or if they retweet like funny things that people have said, I'm totally fine with. Like, I think that you can follow people who are into design or technology or whatever, and if they retweet something that isn't related to that, but it's just like a funny like comment on the world, then like that is perfectly fine. Generally, I also kind of look at who follows them and who we have in common. If we have a lot of people in common, and you can also tell by the people that we do have in common what kind of person that person is going to be, and it's really binary. Like, for example, if I have a lot of iOS developers who I know of that are very kind of nerdy and into their details of specifications and stuff like that, I know that this person is probably going to be the same thing. If this person is followed by a lot of people who do podcasts and stuff like that, I know that they're going to be talking about that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's based on who follows them. It's based on what they tweet as well.
So it's basically on their bio, you read a little bit, and then you see the common. So where do you typically come across that? Because the Twitter application, the iOS Twitter application, doesn't tell you who they follow in common with you, but the website does. And recently, Tweetbot has started showing a couple of faces at the bottom of their profile.
Yeah, I use the website. I often check out profiles on the website, and I do it quite often. Like, if I see somebody retweeted or somebody, if I look at the details of a tweet and see somebody replied, and I'm like, oh, that's an interesting thing to say. Sometimes I'll click on them and just peruse their profile, and I do it quite often. And I think it's important because you don't want to end up following somebody who it turns out you later want to unfollow. So I think you'll learn like what kind of things you like and what kind of things you don't like and what would cause you to unfollow that person. So you kind of become better at that.
So it's quite interesting that you say you don't want to follow somebody that you might later have to unfollow.
Yeah.
Because there's a social implication of, or a social convention about unfollowing somebody that it's generally taken quite personally. There are certain people in my timeline who I'm fine with 90% of what they say, besides some key topics. And I'll mute a lot of keywords that'll take a lot of that out of my timeline. It was similar to like when Star Wars came out, and people would have huge mute lists to anything that might be included in a tweet that would involve something to do with Star Wars. So I do the same thing so that I don't have to see it, because the person is generally fine besides that. Because a lot of people hate the type of music that I like, so they generally just ignore the tweets that I post about those things. And I think that works well, because unfollowing people does have an implication that you're no longer interested in that person. So I've unfollowed several people in the past who have then got in touch with me and said, oh, why did you do that? And you're like, oh, I just like, my Twitter account is like, my Twitter feed easily gets filled up with nonsense and becomes unmaintainable. So to fix that, I unfollow people, and I'll just say, well, I can contact you in other means, like you chose to do to me right now. So why don't we just chat like that? And that's fine, because I'm happy being friends with you and discussing things and socializing with you, but I just don't want to read everything that you post on Twitter.
Yeah, and it's kind of an awkward question to answer, because it's obvious why people would take it personally that you've decided that you've seen something that they've personally went, I'm going to put that out, I think people will be interested, and then you've unfollowed them because you weren't interested, and you've went, I don't want to see this person's content anymore, and you've unfollowed. You can see why people would take that personally, and totally reasonable to do that. I agree with you that a mute filter is like, it's a step down from it. It's like, here's the steps we're going to put in place to alleviate the annoyance of this person. But sometimes it's not like just a certain person. Like, a lot of people on my timeline were tweeting about Great British Bake Off, and that all of those keywords and everything to do with Mary, whatever her face name is just all on mute. Like, I do not want to hear a word about that ever. Sometimes it's like you want to mute something for just a day or a week because it's becoming a big thing.
I sometimes mute people for a week or a month if it's coming up to a thing that I know that they're going to talk about a lot that I know that I'm not going to be interested in. So people use Twitter in different ways, and people choose to post different things about their life on Twitter. And adding a single person can add a lot of noise.
I think when I go to follow someone and I see that they've got 6 figures worth of tweets, then I kind of go, ooh, do I really want to be seeing that many tweets on my timeline?
Yeah, and that's a huge problem. So there's a couple of people that I follow who do have middle six figure tweet counts, and they've only had their account for a year or 2 years. And you go, how do you spend your time doing anything other than this? Like, I don't believe anything that you say is happening in your life, because you're obviously not doing anything apart from glued to your phone, posting stuff all the time. And the reason that my account is so high this month is because I've spoken to a lot more people.
Yeah, and that's much better, because nobody else has to deal with it. Like,
yeah,
if you're replying to people for most of your tweets, then your general timeline doesn't see that, so it's all fine.
All right, so do you want to talk about people with private accounts?
Not really.
Why not?
Because I'm a little bit offended that you made a private account and you asked my opinion on, oh, do you think I should do a private account? I'm like, what are you going to put on it? Oh, I don't know, it's just like this sort of stuff I might put on. I'm like, yeah, go for it if you're interested in that. And then, anyway, a few days later, you set up the private account, and then you're like, hey guys, I made this private account, and then you accept, I don't know, 20 odd, maybe more people onto the account, and I apply, and then you reject me. And for some reason, you're like, oh yeah, I just don't want you to see it. Whereas I think I must be closer to you than most of those people. And whatever the reason is, I just feel a bit offended, and I would rather you not talk to me about this private account that you're never going to let me have access to.
Right. So I am going to talk about it. And I did that purposefully because I wanted to discuss... I'll discuss a little bit about private accounts first. So I've seen more and more often recently people having private Twitter accounts alongside their public account, where they'll post something that they don't want the general people to see, or maybe even specific people on their timeline to see. And I was trying to think about what the upsides and downsides to that were, and what different social implications of that are. And one I could immediately think of was, private accounts, you need to specifically request. You need to request to see. And I wanted to do a little bit of a test to see, because I have a bunch of Twitter accounts, so I was like, I'll just take one of those, I'll make one of them private, I'll say this is my private account and see what happened. And immediately I was like, about 50 odd people applied to see it. And then I thought, because I knew we were going to be talking about Twitter, I was like, I want to test to see I wanted to see what it would be like in regards to like unfollowing people, because I think it's essentially the same thing where you're blocking somebody out of your Twitter experience. So I chose you as the guinea pig to say, well, I'm going to create this account and then I'm going to see you're obviously going to apply to see it, and I'm going to reject you because I wanted to see what your reaction to that would be. And I didn't tell you I was doing it for the podcast because I wanted an honest reaction. And you got immediately offended at it, and you were immediately upset at it, which is difficult because people on Twitter don't know each other a lot of people don't know each other that well, or they gauge their friendships because they don't know each other in real life, so they gauge their relationship with these people based on their interactions on Twitter. And some people may mean that more honestly or more sincerely than others. You never really find that out until you try and meet them in person, or you try and do something a bit more personal. And this is like that. So I created a private account where I have to specifically approve people. So I went to the point of accepting a bunch. I now have more followers on that account than the podcast has. And that happened very quickly.
You posted one single tweet and immediately it's like, I've got more followers than the entire podcast that we've been running for like 2 months now.
Yeah, and I tweet about the podcast quite a lot, and the tweets get a fair amount of impressions, but nobody follows the account. Yeah, so the experiment that I wanted was to see if I could create the account, tweet a couple of things, and I did ask a few questions, and I mostly got followed by private accounts. So it wasn't people who I follow, it wasn't their public accounts that they tweeted.
Interesting.
It was their private accounts. So a couple of people I didn't even know had private accounts. I'm not going to discuss the contents of them. I thought it was very interesting, the reaction to it. And then I wanted to see if anybody would ask about why they had or hadn't got approved. So what I did was I accepted more people than I wanted, and then I deleted people.
Mm-hmm.
And then within about a couple of hours, they direct messaged my public account, seeing how I was and seeing what was up and stuff. You had the exact same reaction, where you requested to follow the account. You then said, "Oh, have you accepted everyone?" And I said, "No." And then a day or so later, you requested to follow. I can't remember what I said to you. I sent you a message saying something. Oh no, yeah, I sent you a joke message saying I think I'm going to start doing a porn Twitter, doing a porn account, and you immediately followed the account again, which is weird. And then
I mean that obviously just reminded me of the private one that you had, and yeah. I went back to it. And I was like, because I don't get a message to say that you've been rejected. And no. I'm pretty sure that at the time when I'd asked before, I hadn't been rejected yet. It was on pending. So I went back and I was like, I'm not on pending anymore. Like, I have the option to follow. So I was like, that's weird. I was like, whatever. So I just decided to follow again.
And then you directly asked me, did you reject me? Or did you reject me from your private account? To which I said yes. And then you went, okay, whatever. And then you just didn't talk to me again for the rest of that evening. And I thought that was interesting because you got super pissed. There are two reasons why I think that that private accounts are... No, I don't actually. There's not two reasons. This puts pressure on me to make reasons.
The first reason that I have in my mind. The second reason that I haven't thought of yet, but I'm going to have to...
I plan on it.
Come up with something.
My issue with the private accounts is if you have public people follow you, and I did this as well because I posted a poll on my private account, and it was a fairly personal matter, and I did it because I wanted to see what people thought, and two, I wanted to see if anyone replied, and people did reply, and public accounts replied, and then you can gauge the context of my original tweet, and the content of the poll by the content of their reply. And that's, I think, is a problem with private accounts because you can see half of a conversation if someone's got a public account and they're talking to a private account. So I can see half of what's going on and I can guess what it is that they're talking about.
Mm.
And then another thing was, if you're really concerned about people seeing what you're saying, find a different outlet because that can still come back to bite. And it's similar to like Snapchat because the concept of Snapchat is you send a picture or a message and then once it's been viewed, it's gone. And it's gone forever. And then people use that for purposes that are maybe not entirely honourable. And that gets screenshotted and it comes back to bite them. And I think that the same thing could happen if people choose to post like very private things in a private account. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the private account. So are you willing to discuss it now that I've explained to you why I did it?
Yeah, I've not really had an interest in having a private account because the things that the things that I would want to post on a private account from a kind of high level thing that I wouldn't mind my followers seeing generally, but there's things that like you might not want your family seeing, for example, if they happen to go on your account. Those kinds of things you kind of like...
Or employers.
Or employers, yeah. There's certain tweets that you would want to only go out to a certain group of people. So if you follow a bunch of people that you're actually really friendly with and that you follow because they have certain interests in areas that aren't like very professional areas, then you'll be happy posting something like when you're drunk to those people and having those people say it. And then on the other side, you might have people who follow you who are like, know you more professionally, and people who are like in the tech community, and you're not entirely sure like how, like they might be a bit older and you're not sure how they might take a tweet that they might see as being irresponsible or totally not in their interest. And so you would avoid posting stuff. And I think if I was to make a private account, it would be aimed at the first group of people. Like, there's no reason that I would have a private account just for the stuff that I would want people to see that is more professional and more about like maybe my apps or design work or development and stuff like that. That stuff's all kind of like, pretty above board for everyone. But the other stuff, I could see why you would want a private account for it. But the stuff that I've often wanted to post and haven't, like the stuff that I've held back, I've kind of thought there isn't enough of it that would want a private account. I think if I started one, then it would just end up that I would maybe use it for the first few days or the first week or so and post to it a few times. But after that, I would kind of realise that I don't really have much to post to it. It's a bit like starting a blog where you're like, yeah, I'm going to start a blog and it's going to be really good. I'm going to post like all my ideas and design and everything like that. And then once you get the first couple of ideas out of the way that you've had in your head for a while,
you kind of just had 2 ideas.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And then it stops and you feel pressure to post stuff when actually you don't have anything to post. So I can't see myself getting a private account just because I don't think there'd be enough material to go on there.
So I think it is interesting because normally when you post something, you have an audience in mind that you think would appreciate what it is that you have to say. And I often forget that audience that I think would appreciate this is not the entire audience that sees what I say. So if I think about the size of the groups of people, I've got select sections of people who follow me from that all follow each other. Like there's a small community of maybe 100 or 200 people. And then so I might publish something thinking it's funny. I might get a good reaction from those people. And then my cousin or a relative of mine will send me a message saying, why did you say this? And I'll go, oh, I completely forgot that you have the ability to see that too. And I think that some people have private accounts and only have a private account. Like there's a couple of people off the top of my head that I can think of from that little community of people who have 300 followers or maybe 400 followers. They want the freedom of posting what they want, and they already have the audience of people that they want to see it. But it's also good for harassment because it stops people just coming at you. And Twitter had a huge problem during Gamergate when women just got like viciously attacked by a really, really horrible minority of the internet. Like this pocket of people came out and just viciously attacked a huge quantity of people. And there was death threats sent, there was legal matters that came into it, and that happened because Twitter doesn't have a good policy on harassment. And making your accounts private, whilst might have downsides to your account, does kind of stop people from just giving you this grief. Because like whilst I can make an account and give someone harassment and they could block me, it's very easy to make another account 5 minutes later. But if you make something private, then and you make you it's almost like hiding yourself. Then you can sort of try and avoid that. But I think that that's a bad solution, and I think that Twitter has to do better to make that harder. Make it less easy for people just to blindly harass and send hate. Like Facebook doesn't have that problem, and Facebook doesn't have that problem because anonymity is not allowed on Facebook. So you can't just make a private account for someone who may or may not exist or for an alias. Yeah, they kind of make you prove you're a real person. And Twitter doesn't do that, nor does it want to, and it makes efforts to just let anybody create an account for anything. And the downside to that is that you get keyboard warriors that can happily tweet or post whatever they say without consequence, and aim it at whoever they want, and without any care over the fact that that's a human being at the other side of that screen who has to read that you're saying that to. And that brings out a really ugly group of people. And I think that's what detracts a lot of people from Twitter.
I think I'm different from you in that I do think about what I'm going to tweet in the context of will people find it interesting? Because I know that I have different groups of people following me for different things. And I do think, I don't want to have all of these tweets going out to somebody who's not that interested in that subject. For example, I used to watch X Factor a few years ago, and I knew a lot of people who were into design development sort of things would be following me and would be seeing all of those tweets and would not be at all interested. It sounded like I was choking up there. Hang on.
You're getting quite emotional about your...
I'm getting quite emotional. It did sound that way. And so I know that I have certain tweets that certain people will be interested in, but a large group of people, and I'm imagining like a pie chart, a fair portion of this pie chart of people would not be interested in. One of the challenges with a private account is that, like you said, it can't be retweeted, and it's not that discoverable. So because it's a totally separate account to your main account, what are you going to do? So I have a solution to this that I've just thought of, which is what if you forget the idea of a separate private account, and instead you have groups of people that can say tweets. So you post a tweet, and then you get like a drop down, which the top one is a bit like Facebook. The top one is anyone. And then the next one could be like designers. The next one could be developers. And the next one could be people who are more personal and who you are actually friends with. And when you choose to add the tweet to one of these groups, it like gives you a warning maybe to say, you know, this won't be able to be retweeted and it won't be seen by anybody outside of this group. And that would mean that you could keep it all on the same single account. It would mean that you were in control of who got to see the tweets and who was in each category. It would make it way more simple to post things that you didn't want one group of people to see, but you do want another group of people to see, without worrying about, are they going to be finding these things interesting?
Okay, I have a couple of issues with that. One is that it adds a huge amount of complexity. I have one reply, I think. I'm trying to think of a response in my head.
One response could just be the word Google Plus, which did that thing, except it didn't take off. And I
miserably.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's for that reason. I think just because we didn't need another social network, which was exactly the same as Twitter or Facebook, in ways that you don't need a third one for.
The difficulty, though, is that is what they were trying to do, and it didn't really work. But I think it was maybe because they just didn't get traction. But it adds another layer of complexity onto what Twitter is, and
But do you not think it's more complex to have a totally separate account, which is completely closed down?
All right, so I was talking about people whose primary account is private, and they only have the one account, and it is private.
Yeah, but you're also talking about yourself, who has your public one and your private one. And I would imagine that a lot of the people who followed you were people who also have a public and a private one. And all of those people, including yourself, are people who want to have the public side of it, and they also want to have the private side of it.
It is. I do think that it would be good if you were able to tailor a response to those groups as well as being public, and you can tailor your timeline in a sense because there's a feature called lists where you can create lists of people who you want you can create like tailored feeds. So I have a few lists. One of like people who I know in real life, people who post certain types of things. The problem is that that's only one way. So it's like a read-only thing. So I can read that list, but I can't interact with that list. And it would be quite good if I could post to just those people. But I think that maintaining those groups would be very difficult and would easily get messy. Whereas just where it's simple at the moment, where you just have a list of people who you follow, a list of people who follow you, and everything you post goes to the people who follow you, and everything you see is from the list of people who you follow. Then you can get granular with that by having lists of that little list.
As I was explaining that, one of the things that occurred to me is that you would likely set it up and add everyone to all of the relevant columns, and then time would go on and you would forget to add new people, and it would just become a thing that you have to maintain and take care of. And I don't really know the answer to that. But I think if you want something that's public and you want some privacy as well, that's probably a good solution. There's also another thing you could do, which is that you could say these tweets are tailored to this group of people, and then everyone will be able to see those tweets, like, because the group would still be public, but they wouldn't see them on their timeline if they weren't in that group. Something along those lines might work.
It's a hard problem to solve.
Because what I just said is also aimed at people who have multiple accounts. Like we have a friend called Nate, he's not my friend, but I think he's your friend.
Go on.
Like, as well, no, hang on. I follow him. I followed him for a while, but he doesn't follow me.
This
he
is what I'm talking about people
really
who find relationships on people who have relationships on Twitter who they may misinterpret the level of the relationship that they have. That was what I was talking about with the private account and why people can take offence.
So Nate has a public account, which is his normal one, and then he has a political one because he was posting a lot of politics tweets. And I would imagine either people grumbled at him or he just realised that most people weren't interested, so he set up this separate thing. I think that's like a really... I think the fact that people's solution to this problem of I want all of these kinds of tweets in a different area, and so I'm going to set up a totally separate account that I'm going to have to also promote, is like a real signal that Twitter's got this wrong and they need to be separating out the tweets into like multiple channels.
It's going to become like Reddit then, because you're just going to have groups of interests. How does this play into real-time events? Because one of the big takes on Twitter that I enjoy is almost like a live feed of occurring events. So whenever anything happens in the world, you know about it really quickly because of Twitter, and people talk about it immediately. So
people will put that on their general thing.
But you choosing to look at the general thing as well, and you just like it's hard to maintain all these feeds because you're then going to have then you might need to get TweetDeck out again so you can have huge columns. I think that's quickly going to get messy, and I think that the downside of that is that you're going to have it's going to take away from that experience of that real-time news, where things that pop into my head are like the Boston Marathon bombings, and whenever someone prominent dies, I always hear about that first on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I think that that is very valuable, and I think that's something that they don't take a huge advantage of. And the same with like the Egyptian. There's Egyptian protests where they turned off the internet and stuff there. That got a huge that was hugely reported about on Twitter as well. And so were the Paris attacks. I found out about the Paris attacks. I walked home from the gym, and I feel terrible about this. I walked home from the gym. I poured myself a glass of wine, took a picture of the glass of wine, and said, "Happy Friday, everybody." And everyone went, and everyone like threw a bunch of responses at me saying, "Unless you're in Paris." And I went, "Well, what the hell's going on in Paris?" And I found out about what the atrocities that happened there. And it's where I find all my news. And I think that they need to be careful not to disrupt that, because I think that's hugely valuable. But they also have the problem of how do you manage people who have hugely varying interests, who want to follow each other but don't want to see everything they have to see? And meeting's probably the cleanest way of doing that. But I think that managing feeds will be difficult because I try not to follow a huge amount of people, and I know people like stick to like a maximum amount. Like some people like I'll never follow more than 200 people, or Joshua Topolsky never follows more than 666 people, which I think is like, just because it's a neat number. So they pick a number and that's what they stick to, and it keeps their feed manageable. But some people I know follow thousands of people, and
that must be chaos.
And yeah, it must be chaos, and they must use it in a very different way from me. Where rather than I'm a bit of a Twitter completionist, and I like try and go through the feed and try and read everything, and that just can't be possible for them. And they just must see a small window of their Twitter feed at any given time. And
I think there was an obvious roundup to our discussion of private accounts that we never actually got to.
Okay.
Now that we've had this...
I do think we need to round stuff up anyway, so I think that'd be good. So lead away with the roundup.
I mean, I was, but you just started talking over it. So closing our discussion of private accounts.
Finishing up or closing up? Rounding up?
Yeah. So to round up our conversation about private accounts. Now we've talked about it. Now we've talked about like your little experiment that you did. Nice little experiment. Not accepting me. Are you actually going to accept me on your private account now?
That account that is currently private for me is my music account. So I'm going to make it public again. Delete the tweets that I put on it, and it's just going to go back to being one of the other accounts that I have.
Okay, well,
so
you asked me, like, oh, what do I think of setting up a private account a few days earlier, and presumably at this point you hadn't considered, like, exactly what you would do. It was just like a thought. Were you thinking you would have a private account for a long time, or what were your thoughts then on what you might want a private account for, and has it lived up to that at all?
My general thoughts at the time were that I thought that it wasn't the best solution for what they were trying to do, or what I perceived people trying to do. So I put out a poll on Twitter and said, if you use a private account, why? And a bunch of people got back to me, a few people direct messaged me, and a lot of it was for things that they just generally didn't want to be public. And I was like, look, fair enough, that's not really what I'm interested in, but I just wanted to see what people had. So that was my general impression, and that was, so for me, it's not for me, because my Twitter is very public, and I just put out there what I think and what comes into my mind. Okay. So I still have the same impression. I did just want to have a go and just try it. Yeah, so one of the other things I think is that I had in my notes, it's this happened with the same thing with Gamergate, is that if you choose to share a bit of your view in the world, it is ultimately very surprising how much of an effort some people will go to tell you that you're wrong, because that view is not theirs. And if you have, say you have a certain position on something, or you just had a thought, it's alarming the amount to seeing people tell you that you're wrong, and they'll find your opinion and try and find an angle to try and take you down. And it's very aggressive, and I see some people have some very, very heated arguments that generally come out of almost nothing. And it gets nasty very quickly, and I think that you have to be a very thick-skinned person to sit through that. I think people forget that you're speaking to another human being, and would you say that to somebody you were friends with? I think that some people are very, very aggressive and very forthright in their opinion of what they think is correct, and they use language like disgusting, morally wrong, and words like that to about something that you've said. And I just find it very striking, because it's a very strong language to use and to put down something that someone else has chosen to say. And disagreeing with people is all right, but you don't have to go out of your way to bring somebody down. It's maybe just the type of person I am, where I don't go out of my way to try and instill my views of the world on everyone else.
I saw this especially during the election. People getting very personal about the different views, and the thing about an election is you have a small number of choices, usually about 3, and then a few others which you're probably nobody's going to go with. But you have a small number of choices, and it's not like you have custom crafted a political party that you're going to side with. You've just chosen one of these that you think is the least worst option. I know I did when I picked who to vote for. And so then people get very personal, and that they're like, oh, well, do you really agree that... And it's just like, out of 3 options, which are all not too dissimilar, they've picked one thing. You don't have to get so personal, and you don't have to try and change their view on something just because your view is that actually this thing's a little bit more important. Or out of the discussion on which of these 2 options will work, I prefer the direction that this party is going in rather than the other one. I'm more convinced that that's going to work.
And it's like you can't condone that opinion to exist. Like they decide that, well, whilst discussing and debating things are fine, and they're not able to settle on a difference of opinion, and they're not able to to agree to disagree.
Yeah, you see them go on and on. It's like, dude, you should have stopped 5 tweets ago.
Yeah, exactly. I have friends who have different political opinions to me. I live with someone who has different worldviews than me quite often at the time, and we discuss things quite a lot, and then sometimes we just go, oh, well, that's where I disagree, and that's fine. And it's great because we can have discussions about these things and joke about them, but it's okay that we don't agree, and that's completely fine. You can not enforce your opinion, but you can strongly express your opinion on your view of things. But you don't have to agree all the time, and you you don't have to bring someone down for having that opinion, and it's okay that some people think something different than you, and some people just they find it so striking that they just go, no, I now need to focus the next 25 minutes of my life to telling you why you're a horrible person. And I find that so difficult to comprehend.
Yeah, it might just be an extension of what they're like on private messages, and maybe when they have conversations outside of Twitter, that's just how they are. But putting it on Twitter makes it all public and just highlights it. And it might just be that we don't talk to those sorts of people generally.
But people have
But do you think it's also because they don't know the person? Do you think that helps because the person's like behind a computer screen and they aren't personally friends with them, therefore they can just spout whatever they're spouting and not worry about
there's a degree of separation. Yeah, there's a degree of separation where you can you're not. It's not like sitting across a bar from somebody and having a conversation. There's no immediate repercussions for expressing that opinion, and you don't have a personal connection to their reaction to what you're saying. And it's almost like in forums where you just post and tell somebody that they're essentially like Hitler for not liking this band. It's you get to have this this outlet where there is zero repercussions for you saying these things to these people, and because you don't know them and you can't see their reaction because it's just their profile picture next to a bit of text, you just say what you want and don't think about it. Don't give it a second thought. You just put it out into the world, and then they have to accept that as a direct thing that you're saying to them, and that can sometimes be quite difficult for somebody to see. And because you don't know what that person's like, who those person's circumstances are, and how what you're saying might affect them.
Yeah, I just can't relate to it because when I was like a teenager, I might have been a bit more blasé. Like just what you said right there. Like all you see is the avatar, and it might not even be their face. And then you're just like, when I was a teenager, I could imagine being more blasé and just like, here's a comment which I'm saying very tongue in cheek, but they don't know anything about me, and I'm not entirely serious about it. But it's kind of rude. And I probably did that as a teenager, but like as an adult, I cannot relate to the idea of, to being like that with someone who I know is an actual person on the other end.
Yeah, and there was an example that came out of my head there that I've now forgotten about. I posted a comment in a Digital Spy article because the person made this article about the movie Inside Out, and I was like, that's incorrect. That's factually incorrect. You're giving people false information here. So I put in the comment saying this is wrong, essentially. And then I thought through my head and I went, they might and I went through all because on Twitter people will just reply to you and then you can reply back. But I was like, I only want to do this once, so I need to make this argument full bulletproof. So I made the argument, and then I thought of all the rebuttals in my head that might come back from that, and then I addressed all of those in the same post, and it ended up being 3 or 4 paragraphs long. And I posted it, I went away, the post came down a few days later, and I was like, oh, that's weird. And then I thought about it, and I was like, this person's just done their job and written some article, and then somebody, being me, some random person has come out of their way and decided to trash it line by line, and then put this argument forward about why this is not worthwhile. And I felt awful about it, because, like, I'd gone to some effort to make this to tell this person that they were wrong, and I did not like that colour on me after doing it, because whilst what they were saying was incorrect, it didn't really matter.
And then there's an article on Digital Spy's company blog a few days later, like, so-and-so has parted ways with the company.
We have changed our comment policy. But I felt atrocious about it, but I was like, oh, that's incorrect, and you should, like, if it was a tweet, I'd be like, oh yeah, it's not actually quite right. We were talking about it with the Star Wars box office predictions. People are saying, oh, it's going to be the first movie to ever make more than $2 billion, and I was like, oh, well, Avatar and Titanic did that. And they went, no, they didn't. I was like, well, they did, and I just sent a link saying, oh, here, go and have a look. and it was essentially the same thing, but it was a different format. So it was an article, it was a news article, and I was like, oh well, that's wrong. Here's why it's wrong. But it came across more aggressive than I had intended, and some people just have no remorse for something like that on Twitter. And
if that person who writes for Digital Spy has spent even a second on Digital Spy forums, like, your comment is just a drop in the pond. Like, those people can be brutal on those forums.
But like, I think that's the point. Like, it's a difference of character where I felt personally bad about that because I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to be that forthright. The only reason that I went out of my way so much to go on about it was because I didn't want to reply again. Like, I just wanted to have the post go out, my reply go out, and that be me done. So I made it bulletproof, and
it's come across as being more aggressive and being like, oh, yeah, here's all of the reasons that your life is a total failure so far.
And this is why I'm correct. And if you think this is the answer to that. And if you think this is the answer to that. And I was, and oh, I've forgotten what I was going to say. And because that's uncharacteristic of me, because it's the only time in my head that I can think of doing it, is that people do this every day, and they do it all the time. And I was like, well, how do you feel as a person that you're making people feel terrible about what they do? And I just don't know the mindset that some people get in, that they choose to be like that.
I have to say that YouTube comments are the bane of the internet and should just be removed.
Oh, they are.
Because, well, first of all, they are terribly formatted from a technical perspective, like YouTube formats them terribly. And they're also linked up with Google Plus accounts, and it's just a massive mess. But second of all, they are just atrocious. Like, should just be wiped from... They should just not be a feature. Just remove YouTube comments, because there's no point even scrolling down, because you scroll down and it's a perfectly nice video, and the first comment can be something like, I thought this video was really good how it showed the way that... whatever. And then you see 7 replies, and then it shows you the bottom one, and it's like, no, your mother is a whore, and let me tell you the reasons. And it just, like, escalates so quickly, and it's every single time. And I don't really know what causes that.
There's a YouTuber called Mr. Sunday Movies who does a podcast called The Weekly Planet that I listen to. I talk to you about it quite a lot. And they did a segment called Hate Mail, where the 8 isn't 8 because there's 8 of them, which is a bit of a joke. And he went through some YouTube comments, and it was for the movie The Fast and the Furious 7. He did a review of that. Mm-hmm. And he jokingly made some jokes about it and then called it the best movie ever because it was all tongue-in-cheek, but people's replies were, you just don't understand. Why don't you kill yourself? And it was just completely out of... like,
yeah, they are very, very aggressive.
And it was like, well, you didn't understand the meaning that they were trying to get to, so you're clearly an idiot. Go jump off a bridge. And have you considered sitting on a knife? And you're like, why is that horrible? Like, what? Like, why do you think that's an okay thing to say to somebody? It's bizarre. And
YouTube comments are I can't think of any area that is worse than YouTube. And it escalates. It escalates so quickly. And it's such a big percentage of the comments that are... It's not even like occasionally you'll see somebody who's just trolling and saying horrible things. It's like literally on every video.
I mean, we're okay because we post
we don't get any
comments on YouTube as well, and because nobody watches it, so that's fine. But if you get any amount of people looking at what you're saying, it's bad. But I think we should wrap up. So to round up, if you have any thoughts about Twitter, your experience of Twitter, your experience of people talking to you on the internet, let us know, because our opinions might be wrong. It might just be our experience, but yeah, so let us know if you have any issues or any comments about what we've said. Feedback can be left at lawson.co/contact, or you can email us at mumblyhour@gmail.com, or find us on Twitter at mumblyhour, or Andrew's Twitter is at andrewprojdent. I'm at Andrew Lawson. those are both on the website as well. Yeah, if you enjoyed it, subscribe, rate and review it in iTunes. That's the best way to get people to find and get new listeners is in iTunes. If you subscribe, rate and review us, that'd be awesome.